Hey, put that credit card away. The guy we're going to talk to today, Tim McRoberts, is going to tell you not to spend credit card debt, don't buy TVs, send your kids to college. Right here on Becoming Branches. Come on in. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Becoming Branches. My name's Adam Cook. Right here, Pastor Dustin McKinney. Guys, if you spend things on credit card, put your Best Buy card away because this guy is going to tell you to stop it. Tim McRoberts, our financial guru here on the podcast. Welcome.
Yeah. Guru's a tough word.
It's a good word.
It's a good word.
Yeah, it's a fun word to say.
It is.
Guru.
Terrible movie, though. I wouldn't recommend anybody making a movie with anything with Guru. I've seen a few,
Mike Myers.
Mike Myers in The Guru. What?
Love Guru.
Yeah, terrible.
I think I saw 30 seconds of that movie and turned it off.
Yeah, it's a terrible movie. So anyway, that's what I'm saying. Anything with Guru in it. So what do we got on the podcast today, brother?
Well, we are incredibly blessed to have Tim McRoberts on the podcast. And so Tim's going to share a little bit about his experience with finances, what God has taught him, maybe some good lessons for us today. But like Tim, we both have spent a good portion of our life in the world of education. Mm-hmm. And in fact, before I knew Tim Roberts was Tim Roberts.
Mm-hmm.
Or McRoberts. Tim McRoberts. Wow,
who's Tim Roberts? You was getting on me for not knowing who Mike Myers was, and he doesn't even know the guest sitting in the chair.
Actually, I know him pretty well. Why I said Tom Roberts.
It sounded like somebody married you and said the wrong name before.
That's totally.
It's never happened.
Why did I say Tim Robbins? I'm thinking Tim Robbins from Shawshank.
That boy's a tall
Tim McRoberts. I actually know Tim McRoberts really well. Why I said Tim Roberts, I don't know. But before I knew Tim McRoberts was Tim McRoberts, I listened to Tim McRoberts. So when I came on board at Avon High School, one of the assistant principals were like, as I'm kind of getting into the role, he's like, hey, there's this guy you really should listen to because he does a lot with kind of what's going on at the state level as far as laws that are being passed with education. I was like, yeah. So I started listening to Tim McRoberts, and I was like, oh yeah, this guy's is super helpful, for an educator, especially for someone who's just starting. At least at a big public school, because I was at a private school before, and so we get to bypass some of those state laws, which is actually really nice. But anyways, that's a whole nother story. And so my boss was like, hey, I was talking about one of his podcasts. He's like, he goes to your church, right? I was like, what? I was honestly
Tim Roberts.
Yeah,
Tim Roberts.
You were looking for
Tim
Mr. Roberts going up and down the aisle.
I'm never going to live that one down. I don't know where my head's at. Who knows? But anyways, so it was kind of funny, meeting Tim McRoberts, being around him and not knowing this is the guy that I've been listening to on this podcast. So Tim McRoberts, tell us a little bit about your life. What kind of different roles have you had in education, and just kind of maybe a little bit of your testimony too. What is words? How has Jesus revealed himself to you, Tim McRoberts?
Well, he's given me a lot of grace for people who don't know my name, but no, I've spent my whole life in the world of education. I mean, when I graduated from Ball State University. My first teaching job was at Cascade High School here in Hendricks County. That was in 1987. That was a long time ago. And I was a teacher and a coach out there. I was an athletic director, assistant principal. Spent 15 years there, and then got hired at Speedway High School as the assistant principal. And spent 5 years in that role, 8 years as the principal. And then I retired and took a job with the Indiana Association of School Principals, which is the state organization for all the administrators in the state of Indiana, and did that for 9 years. And yes, one of the things I did there was a weekly podcast for about 7 years, every Friday. Had a lot of fun with that. No video on that, though. It was all audio. That's where you got to know me and a lot of people across the state. And then I retired from that job this last June, and guess I decided I wasn't ready to totally retire, so I took another job in education. Now I'm an executive director for Education Service Center, which is located in Greencastle, serves schools on the west side of the state, 15 school corporations, so keep my toes dipped in there. But, testimony, I mean, I grew up in a church. My parents were Christians, very blessed. We talk about breaks that you get in life sometimes, and, God has a plan for everybody, but so fortunate to be born into a Christian home. And,
Amen.
you just have a lot of advantages, eternal advantages right off the bat, really. But so I grew up in a church. I knew, all the Sunday school things. I knew how I was supposed to act and behave and all those types of things. And honestly, probably just a little too easy for me. And, I went off to college, and out of that kind of protective shell of my parents and my home church. And, there's a lot of other things out there for people to get sidetracked and all that kind of stuff. So really kind of, don't want to say turned my back, but just kind of walked a fine line with my faith and just, kind of got out of it, quite honestly, for a long period of time. And then, very fortunately, met a beautiful young lady by the name of Carrie Linton, who went to church here at Calvary Chapel. And I started dating her and eventually married her. And so we've been attending Calvary here. We've been married 23 years, so about 24 years or so. Calling Calvary Chapel my home. And needless to say, got a lot more serious about my faith and all those types of things. And have just had incredible experience and incredible life, and just really enjoy where I'm at. And Carrie likes to play these games about what do you regret? What decisions do you regret? And all those kinds of things. And I always tell her it drives her crazy. Sorry, honey, but every decision I ever made led me to where I am, and I like where I am. I mean, I like where I am. So yes, I made bonehead decisions. People do bad things, but you learn from them, you grow from them, and you get back on the track. And so very happy with where my life is right now.
Awesome.
That's a great answer, because that answer is the opposite of victim mentality.
Yes.
That answer was so good because, yes, did I make mistakes? Absolutely. But this is who I am now. This is where Christ has me now. And this all led up to now, and he makes all things work out for good for those who... And I love that. That's not a victim mentality, because you could have stayed there, right? You could have been like, oh, I walked this road and now I'm over here and all woe is me. But you didn't do that. So I respect that answer. That's cool.
Amen. So when you married Carrie, her last name became McRoberts.
Or Roberts.
Or Roberts.
Yes.
So, and you have some incredible, wonderful children.
I think so, yes.
Yes, have got the privilege and blessing to have several of them in youth group. Yeah. And I know their last names too.
But did you know this poor guy and Miss Carrie, who I grew up with Carrie, my sister, I had an older sister, and we all hung out all 80s and 90s. We were just this youth group. That was our youth group of Calvary Chapel. Yeah. And they got married, and Pastor Roger introduced them Mr. and Mrs. McCormick.
That's awesome.
McCormick.
Okay, I don't feel
at their wedding.
I see a pattern.
Calvary Chapel preachers.
Yeah, we don't have it together.
Anyway, so you did this tonight, but nowhere near the caliber of their wedding day.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Thank you, Pastor Roger, for taking one for the team. So I do have to ask, because yes, I do have some important questions about stewardship, but from your experience as principal, what was maybe one of your favorite things about being a principal? What was one of your least favorite things?
Well, how long is this podcast?
One word answer. One word answer.
Well, I mean, I have always, the reason I got into education and the reason I still do things I do, I just always love being around kids. And part of that, again, growing up, my mom, now you call it child care, but in that day she called it babysitting. My mom babysat a lot of children. So there were always younger kids at my house, and I was always organizing sports and doing all kinds of things. So I just always had a lot of interaction with kids that were younger with me. So, education seemed just kind of a natural fit. But, that's what makes it fun, is just the kids. 37 years later, and I'm now coaching the 7th grade basketball team here at Danville Middle School.
That's awesome.
It's just rejuvenated my soul. Those kids are so much fun, and they're so awesome to be around. And and all educators, and unfortunately in our world, educators get beat down a lot, and they get detached from that true love of why you're doing it. And so just being able to be an influence in the lives of young kids and draw on experiences that I've had and be able to teach them and coach them and help them grow into being great adults. And all the time now, I mean, kids who are in the first senior class, I taught seniors government economics. So when I started teaching at 22, they were just 4 years younger than me. So a lot of my first students are grandparents now. And because of social media and Facebook, I'm able to keep in touch with a lot of people, and I see a lot of people. And, when they come up to you and they talk to you, about remembering things from 35 years ago, I mean, that's, that's good for your soul.
Oh, absolutely.
You've had an impact and you've helped them.
Yeah.
So
Awesome.
That's definitely by far the most favorite. The worst thing about it is just all the junk that gets drugged into education now, with politics and with behaviors and with victim mentality and a lot of those kinds of things that just really make the job really hard. And, educators, they get a bad rap a lot of time, but I've always said schools are a reflection of our society and our culture. And when our society's going to junk, all that gets drugged into a school, and it makes schools much more difficult to be able to run with order and to do things when you have all that disorder and chaos in the world. So I would say that'd be my favorite and least favorite thing.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that. Sorry, I was just curious.
No, we talked about this before, and the things you were just saying is that leans more on the heart as a Christian principle, right? Because we talked about where you're a Christian, that's who you are, but your job is a principal, and how often did that cross each other to where they want you just to be a principal and not so much a Christian? Did that ever cross?
Well, I went through that kind of internal battle a long time ago, and I thought, when I was an administrator, I thought I should be in a Christian school. I should be working in a Christian school. And I kind of, I went back and forth, and where I eventually got, and I think God led me there, was, you know what, if I'm not in the public school, who is? Right? If I'm not there with these kids, who is going to be? So I saw that as a great opportunity and a great charge. And I gave a whole lot of biblical advice in my office in a public school.
Yeah.
Kids didn't know it. Parents didn't know it. So, but it's good, sound advice, right? I mean,
Jesus tends to do that.
Yeah, it's good stuff. You guys should read the Bible if you have.
Amen.
So, I think I was able to have a lot of influence there. And the other part of that, too, in misconception, nobody says you can't talk about Jesus in a public school. You just can't take that initiative and start, talking about it. If a child asks you a question, you can answer the question.
Oh, man, yeah.
I mean, there's no law that prevents that.
That's good.
And, for 28 years, every day, they talk about God being out of school. I took Jesus into the school every day for 28 years. You can't keep God out of schools, right? Nothing prevents a child from praying and doing those things in a school. You just can't carve it out and, make it kind of a big deal about it.
Yeah. Well, what I found, because he also tends to do this, is be faithful. And because I was really nervous being at the Christian school, and then a teacher a little bit more, you're not under the microscope as much as a school administrator. And so when I took the job at Avon, I really was like, man, it's going to be like a week, and I'm going to say something that's going to get me fired because of my belief in Jesus. But I just asked God to open doors, and He opened doors all the time. My very first day, I prayed with a mom over the phone who was freaking out because of a crazy, my first day was like wake up call. I was like, whoa. But it's like he provided every opportunity and protected me all along the way to be able to talk about Jesus and to openly talk about the Bible, and He just preserved me and He kept me. So, awesome. Thank you for sharing those things, Tim. So we, not necessarily would not claim to be financial wizards by any stretch of the imagination. We do our best with finances. And we know that God has given us finances. He's given us other resources. So what we're wanting you to come on the podcast today is maybe share a little wisdom of things that you've learned along the way. So there may be people who are watching out there this episode who have never really taken finances seriously or their resources, or even thought about how do I honor God with the things that He's given me. So what would you say to someone who's starting out for the first time? They're like, okay, I need to do a better job instead of just spend on all the things that I want to go spend it on. So what would be some basic general pieces of advice that you'd give to someone starting out?
Well, I would start by saying, I am not a financial expert, and we did a financial workshop here at the church a few months ago, and I'm not an accountant, I'm not a economics guy, I'm not a businessman. It's a hobby for me, as weird as that sounds. I just have always enjoyed personal finance and reading and learning about it, and I really kind of got on the path because when we got married, Carrie had attended Butler University, which is an expensive private school, and had a lot of student loan debt. And we had our beautiful daughter Lucy 10 and a half months after we got married, and decided we needed a minivan for one kid. I don't know why, but we went all in right off the bat, which ended up having 4 kids paid off. But so took out a loan for a minivan. We'd already made a decision that when we had children, that Carrie was going to stay home with the children because she was teaching at the time. So we went from 2 incomes to 1 income. So it got real serious real quick.
Yeah, I would say so.
Okay, we need to figure some things out. So that's kind of what started me on that path, just kind of looking and trying to learn. But I stumbled on a guy named Dave Ramsey, which in the Christian financial world is a big name. Started reading a lot of his teachings and writings, and I didn't realize until that point how biblical finances are. I mean, God makes a big deal about finances. When I say that, people are like, "Ugh." But there's over 2,300 Bible verses that refer to money. Almost a third of Jesus's parables used money or finances to teach a lesson. So God thinks it's important from the standpoint of being stewards and being faithful in little things, and being a good keeper of His things, because it all belongs to God. Amen. Everything we have here, He owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. It's all God's. We take none of it with us.
Right.
When we die, it stays. It's all God's. So He entrusts us to make good decisions, with that, and to show our faithfulness in Him and His provision. Because as weird as it sounds, He will provide if you are faithful and you take care of the resources that you have. So I think that was kind of the conviction I had, when I started all that. In terms of basic steps, for me, a long time ago, I kind of developed a life word of intentional. I just try to be intentional in everything. Intentional in my relationships, intentional in my job, intentional in my finances, right? And to do that, you got to have a plan. You got to do things, that make sense. And that's where budgeting comes into play, and that's a 4-letter word for a lot of people. They're like, oh, budget. I can't live with budget. It's too restricting. But really, if you learn how to budget, and you're patient, because it'll take some time. I mean, you scratch out a budget for the first time, you're going to blow it, because you just don't know where to start with a lot of things. But if you're patient, you trust God, and you work through it, a budget actually becomes very freeing, because if you've given the money a purpose, when you spend it, you don't feel guilty about it, because that was the plan, to spend it on rent or food or a car payment or whatever necessity you might need. When you don't have that budget, that's when you're spending things and not keeping track of it, not knowing where it goes. And, so that becomes a big thing. So, I would encourage people to track their expenses for a month or two before they take that step of a budget. Just very openly and honestly write down all the money that you're spending and what you're spending it on. And that'll help you section off things, into areas in the budget. And it'll also show you, how many times you stop at the gas station for the big Slurpee.
Have you ever done that?
Yes.
Christine and I did that, and admittedly, I'm I'll be full transparent. I'm out of the areas of being head of the household or whatever, this is my weakest area. I'm a splurger. I love to do things with the kick. I'm spontaneous. We're going to go see a movie. Well, man, that's $75. You don't even think about it. Or, hey, let's go out to eat. Five people in the family, 6 people in the family, whatever. There's $100. You don't think about it. So we went to our bank and we highlighted. So yellow highlight was fast food. Orange was Amazon. And it was like $800 on fast food. I'm like, oh my gosh.
It adds up.
You don't even think about it because I don't write it down. Like I remember David Sewell's my father, and he's a banker, right? And he is super faithful and meticulous with checkbook and balancing and all these numbers. And I went in his office one time. I'm like, no, there's no way. He's down to like the penny. And that's just his generation. That's how he was raised. He's a banker. And, with technology, he's probably eased up a bit, maybe does things online. But this is, you said that somebody out there, this is for me. Like, I need this wisdom. So anyway, my whole point was, you're right. If you just look at it, you'd be blown away with how much you're spending.
Track your expenses and get a budget together and then try to stick to it and adjust it as you need to.
Yeah, well, and I'll interject with something that you said. You talked about budgeting, can seem scary at first, and it really becomes freeing, and I will absolutely attest to that. So one of the things, actually, you gave a piece of advice at the financial seminar that I went to that we have implemented, and it has been so good. You had talked about, you kind of tracked those things that you would consider seasonal, like, Christmas, those types of things. I always, I know I'm going to get oil changes about this many times a year. I know I'm going to get new tires about this time of year. And so kind of average what that would be over 12 months. And so now, first of the month, a set amount goes into a different account that's associated with a different card. And it's almost like that doesn't even exist. Like that doesn't exist. So now, like when I'm looking at my bank account, I'm like, I got an oil change coming up. Actually, it's like, it doesn't matter because the money's already there.
Yep.
I don't even think about it. And not in a bad way, but in a very good, freeing way, because that money has now been purposely placed there. So I know that big hit, new tires, that's a substantial amount. And if that's going to come out of my checking account, where now it's in this savings account that's already there, it's already ready, it doesn't take that big hit anymore. Right. And so it really has been wonderful. So I have very much appreciated that piece of advice because it's been very helpful.
And if you don't do that, right, you still need tires. So what do? You open up a credit card. Right. Because you got bald tires, $1,100 for tires. Well, you didn't set it aside. You're forced to take out a credit card.
Yep.
Now you're paying on a credit card payment, and if you don't learn your lesson, like me, you have at one point I had 7 credit cards. Now I'm paying them down now, but it was outrageous. By the time you got paid, you got to pay the piper, and all of a sudden, by the time you're a slave to the money or
now you're playing that plus interest.
Yeah. So then, by the time you get a paycheck, you're like, well, here's $8. I paid off all these things, and you're not getting anywhere because if you, probably more than anybody, you can't do minimum payments on credit cards. It'll be forever. You'll just tread in water, right? So you got to make these monster payments, then interest.
Usually 21% interest.
21 to 29. It's insane. Gosh, you're right. It's crazy.
Well, and in the financial seminar, I had the actual statistic. I forgot to look back, but it's a crazy number. It's like over half of the people in America could not right now come up with $1,000 for an emergency if it occurred. Like you're talking about, you blow a tire or something. More than half of the Americans in this country could not come up with $1,000 for an emergency. So what do? They open a credit card, and they pay with a credit card, and then you start racking up the debt. Yep. So, that'd be another thing I would say when you're starting this journey is, and Dave Ramsey, that's one of his, he calls them baby steps, but first one is to save up $1,000 as an emergency fund. Now, an emergency fund needs to be larger than that, but that gives you some place to start so that as you're trying to go down this journey of getting your finances in order, if something does come up, you don't have to take out a loan or whatever. You got a little bit of money that you can use for that emergency. So I think an emergency fund is imperative, and tracking those expenses and getting on a budget and giving all those dollars a name to spend is huge in that regard.
Yeah. Well, I will attest to that too, because I had to reconfigure our entire budget because Alexandra has always worked full time. And now she's moved to part-time because of homeschooling, which has been a great blessing. But like I was on this, so we were doing the Experiencing God study at the time, and she shared this, and I was like, not until we get this, this, and this can we do this. And it's like, well, God's telling us to be obedient, and then He's going to provide for us. I was like, okay. Because I was like kind of like freaking out. But of course, again, always faithful, and He has provided over an abundance of what we need. But we've had to hit this new budget, and so I actually increased the amount that we were putting towards an emergency fund because we don't have the finances coming in like we used to. So if something does happen, it's not going to be there. And right out of the gate, my riding mower, it went out. And, we have about 2 acres. It's like, I can't push mow that bad boy.
You could.
But then you can cancel the gym membership.
There you go. Yeah. There you go. But we were able to, not all of it, but we were able to use some money from our emergency fund, and we were able to replenish it.
And how did that make you feel?
It made me feel like I could breathe. And it made me feel, I was so thankful that we had been taking, now that was something we had done small-wise before the seminar, so there's already some there, but after the seminar, I was like, we should put more towards our emergency fund. And we did, and so I'm so thankful the Lord worked in that way and provided in that way. So, yeah, it's been great.
Life does happen. There are going to be things that come up. I mean, nobody is shielded from financial emergencies or any kind of emergency. I mean, things happen, and, we just need to be prepared for that, and God wants us to be prepared for that, and have faith in Him in those small things, and go from there.
So I'd like to maybe switch gears to a different audience. So maybe someone who's not starting out, but let's say it's someone who has done well financially, and maybe they have a little bit of extra money, and they're not really sure what to do with it. Do you have any advice for that type of person?
Corvettes are always nice. I mean, think about that. But
I said Mustang, but
I think it it just depends what season of life you're in. Yes, as you get older, you're hopefully in your careers, you're moving upwardly, so to speak, and you're earning more money, and as you're getting debts paid off and freeing up more money, what can you spend that on or use that for? I think it's wise, and I think it's godly advice to plan for long term and for retirement. I mean, the retirement's not mentioned in the Bible. God expects us to work, but I don't think there's anything wrong with preparing for a day when you may not have to do that. Physically, we wear down. Mentally, we wear down, unfortunately. But I think you want to start saving for that long-term investment for retirement. I think if you have children, and this was just a personal conviction of mine, okay? But my parents never had a lot of money, but some way, shape, or form, they paid for almost all of my college. I mean, I had to take out a loan my senior year for $2,500. That was
wow. That's amazing. What a blessing.
Yeah, it was a tremendous blessing, and that just has always stuck with me. So it was important to me to do that for my children. So
they're choosing Duke and Stanford and Yale.
Lucy went to Butler, praise God, she graduated from Butler debt free. Caleb is at Indiana State, and he went with the Indiana National Guard, so that's paying for his tuition, which is helpful. And Will's a freshman now, and we still got Sam to go. But it was important for me to give my kids that opportunity to start their young adulthood without the burden of the debt. That's not biblical. There's nothing that says we need to do that as parents, but just my own personal conviction. So when you're talking about, if you have extra money and you feel led to do that, I think, that's a good investment also, in that sense.
Well, you mentioned, it's not necessarily it doesn't say, send your kids to college, in the Bible, but a biblical principle that you're speaking to. And when I remember at the seminar, you said one of your guiding principles of finances is generosity. Be generous, right? If you hold on to your money like this with a tight fist, God's not going to bless that. But when you are ready to be led by the Spirit to give up that resource that God has given you to be given, He wants to bless that. It may not be financially. Sometimes that's what goes through our head, because God has so many more amazing blessings in store for us in eternity. But tell us maybe a little bit about why generosity is kind of a guiding principle for you.
Well, I think the Bible tells us that again. I mean, it talks about taking care of widows and orphans. And, I would even expand on that a little bit. I mean, we have a lot of single mothers that are out there, and they're not widowed, but they're single, trying to raise kids on their own. There's all kinds of, had the testimony from our people running our food pantry. How awesome is that? The families that we're providing for here in our community as a outreach to our church and showing God's love. So, I think the Bible it calls us to do that also. When you're talking about giving, you're talking about tithing. That's a whole nother topic. But I do believe that those are basic biblical principles that, yes, I do try to live by also.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So with the tithing you mentioned, this is just a personal thing. I've asked a few elders of our church, my father-in-law, Kelly Masterson, who's big into financing, and in your personal tithe, when you get paid, is it net or gross?
It's gross for me.
Okay.
Because I figure if I'm giving the government their cut, I should be giving God his cut off the top. So whatever my gross pay is, that is what I tithe on.
Okay.
And then, all the government gets, Uncle Sam gets his, and, I get my net. But I tithe on my gross.
There you go. That was always a question I like to ask, because
again, nothing biblical.
Right, I understand. We're not saying there's right or wrong here, because I've often struggled with that. Like in my personal walk with the Lord, I'm like, okay, Lord, so whatever I see hit my bank account, I tithe. But I'm like, but if I look at my check, that number doesn't say that. Right. You know what I mean? Yep. So different people give a different answer. So it's just like I said, guys, if you're doing it one way, don't think he's bashing you or nothing. No, this was just a personal question that I got to do more research and prayer about on my tithing and walk with the Lord. So anyway, that was here nor there.
Yeah, but I think tithing, and that can be a controversial subject in a church. No preacher likes to get up and preach about tithing. Sure. So here you go, Pastor Roger. I'll help you out. But, so I see tithing very much as a heart issue and almost as an obedience issue. Again, being a high school principal, and we saw so many kids who were in trouble because they wouldn't obey. I mean, and I'm always saying, this, just obey, just do what the teacher tells you, do what the parent tells you, and life just kind of falls in line.
Yes.
Right. And to me, financially, same is true with the tithe. I think if your heart is there and you are tithing, and it's not anymore the first check I write, because I don't write checks, but the first bill I pay online, I hate to even call it a bill, but I tithe first, and I want to do that joyously, and I feel like I do, but it's amazing to me because I spent about the first 35 years of my life not tithing and struggled financially, and then when I got married and went down to one income and had more expenses and all those kinds of things, and I started tithing, finances fell in order, and I had more plenty than I ever did before. So to me, it's just kind of a thing. It's like finances, I think, will be easier if you fall in line and you joyfully, with your heart, give to God, the tithe that He asked for.
Yeah. Amen. Well, and God doesn't need it, right?
Right.
So it really is. It is a heart obedience issue. Read Psalm 50, right? It says, I own the cattle on 1,000 hills, and I own the hills. What I love, though, because God kind of uses sarcasm, and He's like, if I were hungry, I wouldn't tell you. It's like, I don't need you, but yet I cherish you, right? And I want to be in this relationship with you. And so this way of life is what's going to lead to your best outcome, right? To pursue me, because when I love, you mentioned that the Bible talks so much about finances. Well, God knows, He designed us, right? He knows how we operate. He knows the strongholds we're going to have and how many people do struggle with money. And so what a great way to prevent that stronghold from taking place when you start with the perspective like, this isn't mine to begin with, and I'm going to give God back to all these things that He's given me. Man, He's just constantly looking out for us with these types of things.
Another tithing quick point here: the first time the tithe is mentioned in the Bible is when Abraham tithed to Melchizedek.
Right.
And Melchizedek, as Pastor Roger teaches us, can be considered a theophany. Isn't that right?
We did.
A picture of Jesus. And so how cool is it in the Bible? That's the first instance of tithing, is basically tithing to Jesus, who didn't need it. Melchizedek was a rich man. He didn't need that, but the tithe was presented at that point. So I just think there's a lot of good stuff in there.
Yeah.
And the number 10% was given too. So that's also.
Well, you said the important name, Jesus, because this is what all this podcast is about, because ultimately we want to honor Jesus in everything that we do. And sometimes we can neglect the gifts we've been given, our finances, our resources, our wives, our children. All of these are incredible gifts. And so we just want our listeners to know, like, we're learning, we mess it up, but ultimately, us three here, we do have this desire to lift Jesus high and to honor Him in our life. And so we encourage you to join us on that adventure of honoring Jesus with the things that He's given us. So, Tim, thank you so much for coming on the show. Tim McRoberts on the show.
Don't look for Tim Roberts, because he has never been on our show. Thank you so much. Like I said, this is a personal conviction of mine. Lots to go to the drawing board and pray about. This is good stuff. This is good wisdom. So thank you for sharing it with us.
You're awesome.
Guys, thank you so much for sitting in with us for this financial wisdom from Tim McRoberts on This Week of Becoming Branches.
See you next time.